Hi, everyone. Welcome to the All Things Amyloid podcast, where we feature patients, caregivers, and clinicians who discuss amyloidosis, a rare and incurable disease. Amyloidosis occurs when the body builds up abnormal amounts of misfolded amyloid protein, which can lead to serious and life threatening outcomes. I'm your host, Mackenzie, an amyloidosis patient and founder of Mackenzie's Mission. Our goal for this podcast is to raise awareness and share firsthand what it's like to live with this disease, to care for those affected by it, and to treat it. We hope this leads to earlier diagnosis and start of treatment, which will improve patient lives. Thankfully for patients, treatments for amyloidosis continue to advance. One of the newest is CAR T cell therapy for AL light chain amyloidosis. According to the Cleveland Clinic, this therapy targets the B cell maturation antigen, also known as BCMA, which is found on the surface of plasma cells, which are responsible for causing the disease. Early results are highly promising and offers to provide a quick reduction in light chains. In this episode, I'll chat with Rhonda about her experience preparing for and going through CAR T cell therapy. So if you want to hear from a patient about a new and exciting treatment, you'll want to keep listening. Welcome, Rhonda. It's great to have you on today's episode.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for our listeners to really get a firsthand seat to hear about this honestly promising and exciting new treatment for AL amyloidosis, and particularly what it's like from a patient's perspective. So, before getting into the CAR T, perhaps you just give us a quick recount of your journey up until this point.
Of course. Um, my symptoms began back in 2017. And during those years prior to this diagnosis, my symptoms were far ranging, including edema, where my feet and ankles would swell randomly, unusual, pretty severe shortness of breath when I ran. I had the purpura around my eyes, in my mouth, and on my legs. Chest pains, nausea, vomiting, constipation, unexplained weight loss, and foamy urine. I ended up going to many appointments with specialists, such as the primary care provider that I had, cardiologist, hematologist, rheumatologist, and they ran extensive tests. None of them found answers. And then I also had a misdiagnosis like gout, and one doctor actually told me you are just fine. And it was very frustrating because I knew something was really wrong. Along the way, I ended up with an emergency colostomy of the transverse colon and had my ascending colon removed, which turned out to be very diseased with amyloid. And I had to have thoracentesis biweekly for 5 months as my lungs were filling up with fluid. So I was pretty miserable. And then finally, I was diagnosed 7 years ago with cardiac and GI AL amyloidosis. Was in remission from 21 to 23, but then the light chains began rising and symptoms persisted.
Oh, wow, I'm left speechless. I mean, that really is quite a journey up into this point, and the extensive range of debilitating symptoms really is quite stunning. And I'm sure emotionally it had to be more than frustrating, demoralizing, discouraging, and, many more, no doubt.
Right. So in 23, being told that I was out of remission, or actually this would have been 24, I was devastated. And I knew what was going to be coming, which was a lot more treatment. And I had new symptoms of AFib, which were very bothersome and making me feel nauseous on a daily basis, actually. I had a lot more doctor's appointments and new treatment consults that really took over most of my time.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. It's really that unseen emotional side that often gets overlooked and really is underappreciated what patients have to go through and just trying to get to treatment. So, at this time, your disease is back, and how did you come to learn about CAR T? And tell us a little bit more about what it took, what were the requirements to be able to to be eligible for such a treatment?
Sure, it's actually quite the process. Um, my local hematologist and my Mayo Clinic Rochester hematologist consulted together and offered it as an option. And they did warn me that it was going to be quite the process, but according to the research, it did show so far that remissions would end up being longer and life prognosis would also be increased. And actually, when they brought it up as an option, I did not hesitate since I was ready to just receive the best treatment and then get the best possible results. So, part of that process that they talked about in order to even qualify is it had to be the third line of treatment, which meant two other lines of treatment did not work to bring the protein numbers down. So, my first line of treatment was DARA, which ironically had worked the first time, but now not the second time. And the second line of treatment was an oral chemo, Ninlaro, and neither one of them were moving those light chain numbers at all. They were just stuck. And so once, you have that as a qualifier, actually the next thing that they have to do is your insurance has to approve this procedure to even start the testing because the whole procedure is right around $2 million. So the testing began, many months of testing, brain scan, kidney test, dental exam, PET scan, bone marrow biopsy, cardiac testing, neurological testing. And the neurological is to determine a baseline. And you even have a required meeting with a social worker to determine, who would be your caregiver for 24/7, which is required for 30 days post T-cell infusion. And that social worker also would help you organize a place to stay and make sure that you could actually handle 30 days away from home. So any of those things could certainly be a disqualifier if your health is too fragile or if other procedures need to be done first. Um, and that could be if they determined you needed dental work, you had to get that done previous to the whole process. Um, and I did actually, at the beginning agree to be part of 4 research studies where they would draw extra blood um, to study for part of research. And then I agreed to be part of a pre-PT program for CAR T patients. And they were all eager for information since this process is so new.
That's truly an undertaking to really even get to the point where you can start treatment.
Right,
Um,
right.
so you've gone through this extensive workup. Now you're getting ready to start treatment. Take us through what treatment was like.
Sure. So for me, it actually began January of this year, 2026. And this was the cell extraction section. Um, because I went through all that testing and passed all the testing and everything. So they put 2 lines in your neck where the plasma is extracted. They extract the T cells and then they put the rest of the plasma back into your body, so return it to your body. That was like a 5-hour process, so pretty much the whole day. And then the crazy thing is they put your T cells in a cooler with your name on it, and someone personally would fly it to New Jersey for them to be processed. And that process is like 6 weeks. So that actually seemed to go pretty fast. And then just this February of 2026, they were back. And so, that meant they were going to have to put them back in. But every day then for 3 days before that cell infusion, I got lymphodepleting chemo, which is given to you infusion. You had to make room for the T cells, but it would deplete your immunity. And of course, for me, it meant, hair thinning and extreme nausea, actually. Um, but that T cell infusion process, really, it was only 30 minutes. And that bag looked so small, but they said there's millions of T cells in that small bag. Um, so those T cells then are like retrained to act as little soldiers. They're going to attack and kill any irregular plasma cells. And I was told they're possibly working in your body for as long as 7 years, which is pretty exciting. So that's the research they have, so far as what they know. Um, and then the post infusion, and this is why you have to stay close to the facility, is you go to the clinic every day for 30 days for blood draw. You get a mycofungin infusion. Your immunity levels are checked every day, hemoglobin, liver function. Um, and you're treated as an outpatient. So we did have to be in a hotel. But my immunity dropped very low, and I had to take an antibiotic, and that antibiotic combined with the mycofungin infusion made me very, very nauseous on a daily basis. Um, and then, of course, at the end of this 30 days, you have to get that bone marrow biopsy again, the PET scan again. But yeah, the crazy thing, the neurological testing, they did this every day during those 30 days. So I had to give them a handwriting sample. I had to write the same sentence every single day. And then they would ask me questions like the date and doing some math problems and saying the months backwards. And you might wonder, why did they have to do all that? And it surprised me too. But one of those symptoms that you could end up having is neurotoxicity, where your body rejects those T cells. And so that would have meant a lot of confusion, symptoms very similar to Alzheimer's. And that would have required hospitalization. And it could have been CRS as well, where you have flu-like symptoms with a fever that could require medication. Um, it's like cytokine. It's an inflammatory response. But and that's why you, of course, need a 24/7 caregiver to be watching for those things. So I was just extremely fortunate. My sister, who is a doctor, was present with me for a week and, of course, understood all the vocabulary and everything that they were saying. So she was with me. And then I had a sister who's an RN in cancer research, actually. So she was able to understand everything. And then my husband took care of the other 2 weeks. But I was lucky I didn't have any of those serious symptoms. Mine were mainly nausea and vomiting. Um, yeah, so and then the post 30 days, which for me, the end of that 30-day was March 18th. You switch then to blood draws once a week, which I was able to do locally. Um, Hema visits every 30 days for 90 days, and then after 90 days, you can switch to blood draws every 3 months. But then the crazy thing is around 6 months is you have to redo all your childhood vaccinations. And they all have to be given again, even the adult vaccinations you had, such as shingles, because they're basically all wiped out.
Well, thank you for taking us through that. I mean, it really is such an extensive and intense process, and I'm glad to hear that it went well.
Yes,
And
yes.
so now you're what, 4-ish, 3-ish months out from treatment. How are you feeling today? What are some of your takeaway thoughts you have for our listeners who may be
Yeah.
interested in pursuing CAR T?
Yeah. So I'm at like post day 60, and I gotta say that it's super exciting news because my blood numbers show remission. And I was told you're in remission and you can now, just get your blood drawn every 3 months, and that's when your checkups are. So I'm super happy about that, super excited. I'm feeling really, really good. Just some fatigue, but I'm working on that with exercise and movement. But other than that, I feel great. So yeah, I do have some advice for people that are seeking CAR T cell therapy or some weigh-ins. I guess a patient needs to weigh their options for sure, because it's a life interrupter because of that outpatient care that you have to be close to the facility for, finding caregivers for 4 weeks. Because if you were someone who didn't have a caregiver, um, they hospitalize you for 30 days instead. And, they're just watching you for those 30 days. Certainly an option, but a more expensive one that insurance would need to approve. And even if you do not qualify physically after all that testing, it doesn't mean that you could not get the treatment later. They might just determine that you need some procedures done first before you would get that whole CAR T process. So, because it is quite extensive, all that physical testing. And, from what they told me, CAR T treats more than one type of cancer. So, it certainly could be a life changer for many people.
Yeah. Well, Rhonda, it was an absolute pleasure having you with us today, and thank you so much for taking us through your experience and your journey. I'm sure so many of our listeners will really find value in our conversation.
And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. You know, a lot of these cutting edge treatments like CAR T really are leading the way and have the potential to be truly transformative ways to treat amyloidosis, particularly the AL form. And clinical trials are critical to the development of these kinds of treatments. So we're so thankful for patients who take part in and contribute in these trials to really allow these treatments to become available to all patients. But most importantly, I'm grateful, and I'm sure the whole community is grateful that Rhonda had such a positive outcome, and we're rooting you on,
Thank you.
of course. Thank you for listening to the All Things Amyloid podcast. If you find our podcast informative, please follow and share it with others. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at Mackenzie's mission, please visit mm713.org. We'd also like to thank AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Bridge Biopharma for their sponsorship to help raise awareness about amyloidosis. We hope you stay tuned for future episode drops. Thanks for listening.